there's territory for each of us that we don't know we could have. We don't know we could enter. We don't know we could be in. And until you're in it, you're not going to know what's possible. And there's the territory that you're in, and you only believe what's possible because you think that the territory you're in is the territory. And it's like there's so much more for you. And I feel like sometimes doing these little changes gives you new territory, and that's why you see new possibility. And also, the other side of that is if you try to hang on to the territory you have, I feel like you continually lose it. It's just, you get less and less and less of the territory you think you have over time when you're comfortable. And pretty soon you end up with very little territory at all and very little possibility.
This is Way of the Artist with Brandon Colby Cook and Evan Schulte.
Identifying your blocks and demystifying your struggles
so that you can claim your own path
and make your life a work of art. Brandon. Brandon.
Oh man.
This was one of those days where, we had lots of interesting things that we, wanted to talk about. Lots. So many things. A plethora of interesting things to say and talk about. And yet it was just such a slog to figure out, okay, what do we really want to talk about with everybody here today? And we've got it narrowed down to this. I think we might end up branching out into some things, but hopefully this will keep us in line. Hopefully this will keep us in line. Give up what's comfortable. Find out what's possible.
Oh man, you guys don't know how long it took for us to come up with that title.
And just so everyone knows, it's not just about like sometimes we can get precious about titles, but it's more often than not, for us, trying to come up with the title is really about us figuring out, well, kind of what's the major theme and through line of the conversation that we're seeing emerge, which again, really, it's just to help keep us on track, more or less. But we've got, I think, we're going to get into some interesting stuff in this conversation, like we talked a lot about, about the territory that we find ourselves in, the territory that we create for ourselves, the trappings of being of kind of just wanting comfort, the trouble that comes with comfort and the trouble that comes with trying to control things. These are all things, and they're all related to each other. So, I'm excited to talk a lot about those sides of things, and you're excited to talk about, what's possible and kind of that relationship that exists between sort of in our title of that desire for comfort and possibility, and why maybe that's a good place to start off this conversation, is just what is that relationship in the title and theme of this episode? And I don't know if you want to take it over. I mean, I've got some thoughts on that, but I'll hand it over to you.
All right. Well, something I've just realized in my life is that, I think I've talked about this on the podcast a number of times, but I went through a period in my life where some pretty dramatic things happened, in my opinion, and they changed the way I saw myself, the way I saw people, the way I saw my future, just everything. And it flipped the script in a lot of ways. And I think that one of the challenges of that, among many challenges that come from such a dramatic change in your life, is like, I went through like a kind of a depression, kind of an existential crisis through the whole thing. But like coming out of that and like being okay on the other side, feeling good and being happy again after that happened, left me with a few strange things. Like in some ways, I don't know how to explain this other than to say, like, for a while and still sometimes today, it feels like the end of a story. And I think what's very difficult at times is to start the new story of whatever life is about to be for me and whoever I am becoming or whatever life I want to step into. And in a weird way, I think what happens is when you go through a kind of a depression or kind of a hard period in life, when you get out of it, you kind of never want to go back to that dark place again. So there's a safety in just kind of being like, but I'm happy and everything is okay. And that kind of, you kind of want to maintain that. And I think that's where the control is, but it can get comfortable and then kind of uncomfortable. And I think that the new chapter for me has been about kind of the possibility of like, what if this is the beginning of the next story? And that's an exciting idea to me. And I think that's where the control, it's like, well, what if you let go of the control? And I think the best way I can explain this is like, I'm hanging on so hard to the life I thought I had or who I thought I was, that by not letting it go, I'm not letting the next story begin. So that's kind of where letting go of control and finding possibility is exciting for me. Where that's going to lead in this conversation, I don't know. But I figured that was the best way for me to explain my position on what we're trying to talk about here. I'm excited about it, honestly. But I don't know where it's going to go.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think, I mean, it will go where it will go as we give up some of our control on this. Yeah, I think that for me, it's like, it's part of the message in the title as I see it is that, you know, in order to discover what's possible, you have to give up the comfortable. And just in some of what you were saying there, Brandon, it's made me think about just some of the events of my own life, you know, events of change, some of them which were conscious decisions on my part to make a change. Some of them pressed upon me. Some situations it was just like, you know, it was my decision to make a change, but, you know, it was only after it got to a certain point. So there's a lot of different ways that can all sort of manifest itself. But it's interesting because like we resist change so much very often in our life. I would say for most people, we resist change more than we embrace it. But as we were sort of talking about beforehand, you know, like the great artist is absolutely embraces change, moves with change, and actually is change itself. And I think that's an interesting thing that I hope we get into at some point in this conversation. But it's funny that we have such a resistance to change. When I look back on my life, it's just like, well, even when change that was created was under very intense and uncomfortable conditions, it was almost always something positive. Like looking back in hindsight, the change is almost always positive. There was something good that came out of it. But yet it's sort of attachments to what I myself have been comfortable with, you know, and sometimes it's those change, you know, I think that's maybe part of the issue is that we experienced some kind of change and it was challenging, but it ended up being good. And now we're in a place that's like, oh, okay, this is good. This is better. And then we just kind of want to stay there, you know, because it's better. It was better than it was before. Yeah. And then we get stuck there. And then change starts to come along again, or the pressure of change starts to come along again. We go, oh no, it felt like I thought everything was so good here, but then we've got to there's got to be another change and another change and another change and another change. And we treat it almost as if, oh, but this time it's going to be bad. Or what if this time it goes bad? And ultimately, I think that a big element of this is that there's no getting around the whole life element of change. It's like whether you're moving with it or you're moving against it, it's going to happen. So what the hell do we do about that whole predicament?
Mm-hmm. Also, I think that whatever place you're in, it's like it's temporary. Like everything is temporary, and I think that's part of the problem is that we don't embrace that, as like a it's like everything is temporary. Like it's all it's and I think that there's this kind of like control has a lot to do with just trying to hang on to something for a longer period of time and then to always kind of change it up for something better, if you're going to change it up at all. And I think part of if I think about the master artist, like what is the master artist like? They would embrace change and not be scared of it. They wouldn't be scared of the unknown. Like whatever the change is, I'll deal with it as it happens. And that would be flow. And flow is like a state of fearlessness in a lot of ways. It's a state of, it's not even courage. It's just, there's nothing to fear in change, really. And I think the whole idea that we do fear it is part of the problem, and it's like also just fearing this thought of maybe being uncomfortable. It's like, I think if you're kind of like, well, I will be uncomfortable. I'm comfortable now, but I will be uncomfortable at some point. So I'm just going to accept that when it happens. And then when I'll be uncomfortable at some point, and I'll just be like, well, I'll be comfortable at some point. And it's like the same thing. It's like, it's all going to kind of come back, it all kind of, when you're in flow. I mean, if you're thinking about, for example, writing a script, if your character always wins, it's boring. Your character needs to win and lose. And sometimes your character needs to lose a lot before they win, just to make the win actually mean something. And I think in life, I think the most successful people, the people who achieve their dreams and goals and greatest desires and do the amazing things we all wish we could do, they fail like 9 times before they get one success. And in those 9 failures, there's 9 pivots of change before you find the success ticket, before you find the opportunity, before you find the way through the barriers that you've been hitting. And that's just a token way to put it, but it could be, you could fail 19 times or 39 times or 99 times, like this episode, until you get to the point where you're like, I got it. I figured out a way into whatever I was working towards. And I think that, I think a lot of the time the fear of change is the fear of failure. Honestly, I think it is. I just think you have to go like, well, this might not work and it might make my life different, but I'm going to try it. But it's kind of like, or you don't try it and you just stay where you are. And you're like, but if I just stay where I am, I just have what I want. And I can tell you this from personal experience. That's how you end up in a toxic relationship. That's how you end up in a toxic relationship, because you're in a bad relationship. You're not in a healthy one. And you're like, I could leave this relationship and start a new one, but there's these good things about it. And it's like, well, I'll stay in it because maybe I can make this work. And really, you should leave. You should walk away. You should go. You should do the new thing. You should be alone, but you don't. And I think that there's lots of different parallels to that, but I found myself in a toxic relationship. And when you get out of it, hopefully you do, you look back and you go, how the hell did I stay in that for so long? And why did I bother? And I feel like comfort's like that. While you're in it, you're like, it's not so bad. And it's just justification. But often comfort is actually very bad. And it's in hindsight, when you look back, when you thought you were comfortable, it wasn't as comfortable as you thought. And that's how fear works. I think fear works like that. It makes you so scared to move that you justify not being happy where you are, but you're happy enough. It's just enough. And you're living on breadcrumbs, to a sense, breadcrumbs of happiness and joy.
Yeah, there's sort of like, you become comfortable with the discomforts that you know.
Yes.
you know, there's a lot that you said in there that, man, that was there's was good for some commentary and for diving into on some of it. There was something that you said that I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And now I don't know what it was. Oh, yeah, you know, you were talking about relationships.
Okay.
That's what it was. You're talking about relationships. And I wanted to open that up in the sense it's like, well, you know, because all of life is relationship. You know, it's like we have a relationship to absolutely everything. So, yeah, it could actually be a relationship that you have to a person, but it could be a relationship to absolutely anything in your life, your work, to yourself, to your beliefs, your community, your, you know, pick something, you have a relationship to it. You know, and so there can be things that we just sort of live with that keep us small, that keep us kind of closed. It keeps us from that possibility. Yeah. So I just want to point that out, and that it's like, to open up the scope of what we're talking about as far as relationships.
I think you bring in a really good point. I mean, I think, you know, a toxic relationship, I think like people can picture that as, oh, you're in an abusive relationship with another person or whatever. And it's like, yeah, but a toxic relationship can really be anything. It can be your relationship to your job. You know, it can be a relationship to just where you live. It can be toxic. You know, it's like people will live in shitholes and not think that they could live anywhere better. And they'll have all sorts of justifications for this. I mean, you know, well, I can't because rent would be too much, or, you know, or if I leave this place, I might end up in a worse place. You know, it's all sorts of things. This is, I think the whole thing is like, if you take the way of the artist philosophy, it's like, well, what would the master artist do? The master artist would see the possibility, would embrace the fact that, yeah, I might end up in a worse place than this on my way to the place I actually want to be, you know. But the person who's not being a masterful artist will stay where they are, not like it, in fear that they might end up somewhere worse, and they'll never make it through that journey. And I think part of the journey, you know, way of the artist, is sometimes you got to go through a valley. And I think a lot of the time we don't embrace change because we know to get to the mountaintop that we want to get to, we have to walk through the valley first. And the valley fucking sucks. I mean, I can say that from personal experience. It's hard as hell, you know, sometimes it's like the worst place and the last place you ever want to be. But it's like, you know, it's kind of like, to be token about it, it's like, would you walk through hell to get to your heaven, you know, knowing that you would eventually get through hell if you just walked through it? But you'd have to face your fears. You'd have to face the worst shit you could ever imagine. Would you be willing to do that? And maybe that's the only way you can see heaven, is to understand your own hell, you know, to have context. But like, that's change, you know, in some ways. I think sometimes, you know, I just say this in my personal opinion, I think sometimes change is very unforgiving, but at the same time, it gives you a lot of grace. But I think it can feel very unforgiving at times. I feel like you can be in a change period, and it can be like, why am I going through hell right now? And it's like, hell is the only thing that's going to make you change. It's the only thing that's going to make you do anything, because you'll stay in comfort. So something I learned along the way was, when you're going through your hell, be thankful for it. And this goes back to our last conversation, because that is what's going to get you out of the dead zone, the purgatory of comfort. Mm-hmm. And that's the only way you're going. You're never going to go otherwise. So, you know, whatever the hell is happening to you right now, survive it, push through it, because on the other side of that is fucking glorious. But it's hard when you're in it. That's all I can say.
Yeah. It's, and I think that there's an important distinction to be made here, in that it's like, as I'm sure you're not, but I'm not against comforts. There's nothing wrong with comforts.
No.
You know, like I think comforts are great. Comforts are a wonderful, you know, side of life. a hot chocolate on a cold day, or having some nice luxuries, in your home, or whatever the hell it is. I'm not opposed to that in the least, but when that's what our life becomes about, when it becomes about being comfortable, I think that there's a lot of dangers there. And I think sort of, the master artist, from, looking at it from that lens, is very much aware of that, is very much aware of the danger, the pitfalls, the sort of the kind of hell that comes from making that your pursuit, and it can take the face of being like, okay, well, once I get the house, this kind of house, or once I, have this amount of money in the bank account, or, once I've achieved this or that, then everything will be good. That's one way that we can look at comfort, is like material, right? But sometimes the comfortable thing is giving up on a passion to pursue something more quote unquote practical. You know what I mean? Like as a vocation, for example, like there are so many people who give up on their actual passions and their dreams to do something that's more comfortable, for whatever reason that is in their own minds, because like I think even the whole idea of that is questionable, because with this idea of comfortable, there's also I think it comes in tandem with the other idea that we were talking about, which is control. Because you have an idea of comfort in your head. What would be a comfortable life for you? That's an idea. It's not a reality. It's just an idea that you have, that you're working towards. In order for that to happen, things have to play out just so. Things have to go in a very certain and predictable manner for that to happen. And with the desire for that comfort, and thereby having to control, comes a lot of anxiety, comes a lot of fear, and also a kind of inflexibility. You know what I mean? Like not being able to do anything without there being some sort of like crazy plan, like without there being some sort of elaborate plan to do anything, and I've known people like that, where it's like you're in the middle of some sort of beautiful situation that kind of spontaneously happened, that nobody planned for. And they're going, it's like, okay, but we're gonna, like, we have to get going and do this. It's just like, well, why do we have to go and do that? Or why do we have to take that step now? Like, aren't we kind of experiencing the thing that that we would want to experience in this moment now? So I think that when you're living your life in that way, that's kind of its own kind of hell. It comes with it's there's no movement. There's too much rigidity in your sort of attitude towards life that way, and any artist will tell you, like, I'll just speak coming from the acting world, like in the acting world, there's sort of this piece of wisdom that, like, oh, it's those moments of surprise, of genuine surprise, that are the best. That when something occurs in the scene, when you're up on stage or on camera, and something happens that you hadn't rehearsed, or that your partner hadn't done in rehearsals beforehand, or whatever the hell it is, or maybe sometimes it's something that's completely out of everyone's control. someone comes walking in that wasn't supposed to come walking in, who just comes wandering onto the set or whatever. But something comes out of it. And suddenly we're just like, and it's something that you're taught to embrace as an actor, because it's like, whoa, suddenly now you're present. Suddenly now you're here living, as opposed to going on like an autopilot, so to speak. So I know I've said a lot of things here, but I think that in a nutshell, what I'm trying to say is that this illusion and delusion of comfort and control that we actually live by, and I'm not saying this as someone who's saying like, I'm completely free of that, because I catch myself all the time. There are things that I do every single day that are based out of me trying to control things and to be comfortable, but I can also say that it's like, but usually when I'm doing that, there's a lot more fear and anxiety that's going on in my life when I'm doing that. And that's a kind of hell. I'm not being my best creative self when I'm in that space.
I'm thinking about this as you're talking, and I'm thinking about how, like, it's not about removing all comforts from your life, and it's not about removing all control from your life. It's about letting go of some when it's necessary. It's about having the flexibility to abandon it at times. It's like, I think like, for example, you might find comfort in having a certain amount of security. And it's like, I think security is good. I think there's a certain amount of like safety that is important. And I think like, it's not about an all or none. I think it's about kind of a scale where it's like, how much discomfort am I willing to accept? How much comfort am I willing to let go of? How much control am I willing to let go of? Because I think about the most exciting friendships, relationships, experiences, acting scenes, scripts I've ever written. They're all a little bit in control and a little bit out of control. They're a little bit comfortable because I know what I'm doing, and uncomfortable because I don't know what I'm doing and I don't know where this is going. And, that's what makes it fun. And I think that's kind of where the law of play kind of comes into this whole thing. You got to give it play. If you're too controlled, it's too tight. There's no room. There's no space. And we talked about this before the conversation, kind of even started recording, but that was something we talked about. We talked about space. And I feel like, you need to create space to be a little bit out of control, to be a little bit, uncomfortable, and I don't think it's about an all or none. I don't think it's about like, okay, well, I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to sell my house. I'm going to, do this. It doesn't have to be that extreme.
Yeah.
And I think this is the big thing. I think that a lot of the time we don't do stuff because we're always thinking in extremes, or we're always like saying, well, if I do this, then like it's the end of the world. And it's like, maybe you don't have to do it all the way, because like some things are best done 100%. Other things are not. Sometimes things are best done 15%. And that's exactly the amount you need. And you have to kind of make your assessment, but 0% all the time, nothing, giving nothing, and always being so tightly wrapped. I think we all know that that's no way to live, but yet maybe we accept that too much for ourselves,
Yeah. And and the thing is that we so, I think, desperately need things to, like, we desperately need change, and we desperately need there to be a component of something entering the equation that we hadn't thought of. You look at all of human history, and I think that we're actually geared towards this, which is maybe touching on that whole aspect of like, we are change itself, as also maybe we could translate into like, we are creative beings. I fundamentally believe that we are creative beings. Like, you look at the history of humanity and we create things. and new things emerge. And the only way that new things emerge is by things being a little out of control. It's that little element, just a little bit of out of controlledness can go a long way. It can go a really long way. It's like you were saying, it doesn't have to be some grand thing. Sometimes it's that. Sometimes it's something really massive. There are probably some people out there who it's just like, you know what? Maybe you do need to sell your house and quit your job, and you need to, maybe that is something you need to do. It's, for most people, probably not. But for some people, absolutely.
Right.
But
there's no cookie cutter answer for
there's
everybody.
no cookie. No, there's no, it seems fitting for this conversation, but there's no certainties with anything in life. I find it's like there's tendencies. I would say it's like things tend to go in a certain way, but not always. And it's that not always that is absolutely crucial. It's such a key ingredient to creativity, to how we evolve, and to how possibilities emerge. Because if everything always went along in an exactly predictable way, that would become so boring and nothing would happen. You know what I mean? Like nothing would happen ever. It would just be a continuous thing of the same thing all the time. We would never invent anything new. There would never be any new great pieces of art in any medium. It's that unknown, out of control element that makes us go like, holy shit, we've never done that before, or we've never seen this before, or heard this before. And I think that applies in so many different areas of our world.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's in our nature. It's like, I think that's part of the problem is when you get too comfortable and you refuse to change and you try to control too much, you actually deny your own nature. And I think that's where the problems for us occur. I think that's why we get upset and depressed. And I think that's why, I think that too much change too quickly without your wanting it can be very difficult. Mm-hmm. So I want to preface that with, preface it with like, yeah, it's, too much change too quickly, too unpredictable. That can be difficult. And I think that that's why I think this is not an all or none conversation. This is one of those conversations where it's like incorporating a little bit. I think like a little shift is sometimes all that's necessary. And I think most times all that's necessary. But I think in some cases you need an extreme shift, and you need an extreme shift, and it's got to be today, and it's got to be now, and there is no tomorrow. And if you don't do this, it's life or death. I think, and sometimes it is that, but I think more often than not, it's a fraction, it's a percentage. It's I'm doing this and this well, but I'm not doing this well, or this and this well. And and you gotta pull the trigger, you gotta make the call, you gotta do the thing. And I think it's like very uncomfortable. I think like, you're smoking and then you realize, oh shit, I got a lung cancer. I got this issue, whatever, with my body. And if I don't stop doing this, I'm going to die from it. And it's like, well, you gotta make the decision, and if you keep playing and I think this is another thing, actually, it's kind of bringing on this other part, the delusion. Comfort exists in a delusion. A lot of the time I actually have witnessed, seen in myself, seen in others, and observed that most often we don't change. Our reasons for not doing are so delusional. It's like, I'm fine, nothing's going to happen to me, it's not that bad. It's all the same shit we always say. And you know what? I might even rung off for some of our audience members the things you're saying to yourself. If you're saying that shit, you need to get higher standards, you know? And I think that's another thing, man, I'm just, a bunch of balls are dropping right now, but it's like, that's another element of change. When you have higher standards, you will change. And that's part of the reason why you don't. Comfort keeps your standards low, you know? And it's like when you raise your standards, the only option is change. And sometimes I think we just settle, we just accept such shit. And we know we shouldn't, but it's comfortable. And Evan, I've thrown out a lot of stuff, but
yeah,
you know what? It's made a few things actually start to make some sense for me. Kind of know it, but I think reiterating it in this conversation has given me some clarity.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's interesting. Like, I love so much of what you just said, and I want to put a different frame on what you're saying about, like, you know, standards. You know, and just like your standards are high, like, because it's not a sense of sort of elitism or anything like that, because that could be, I want anybody to make that mistake, because I that's not what you're saying. You know, it's I don't know, maybe a few months ago, I was having this conversation with my wife, and I was saying to her, it's like, you know, I think a big part of life and being a human being and how we grow and evolve is letting go of our unworthiness. And I think that that's like a different way of standards, you know, it's like, it's a different way. It's
That's
like,
great.
you know, it's like very often our situation has a lot to do with our own sense of how unworthy we feel about things, you know? Man,
you're hitting home. You're hitting home. Yeah, I think yeah. Wow.
Hey man, like I'm speaking just from my own experience, where it's just like, holy shit, like and every now and then we have a moment where we say, no, I'm letting go of this unworthiness because I'm not unworthy of something better than this situation. You know, and that's an inner change, and that's like, you know, nobody can give that to us. You know, that's an incredible gift that in many ways we give to ourselves. But, you know, often it has to get to a pretty painful point for us to come to that thing. But yeah, I just wanted to put that sort of flip on this idea of standards, which is just like, it's like our standards is just like, how it has so much to do with our own feeling of unworthiness.
I love that. I mean, that's my favorite thing of this whole conversation, what you just said, because I mean, that's such a great way to look at it. It's so spot on. I mean, because that's really the thing is, you know, like being in an abusive relationship. When I had that experience, it's kind of like there is an unworthiness of the whole thing, and it's not like, I think that's the thing. It's a subtle thing sometimes. Sometimes it's clear, like, I just don't know if I'm good enough and blah, blah, blah. And I think that goes on for us. But sometimes it's not so much. It's just that you don't recognize that you're worth so much more than what you're settling for. And, but you don't, at least in my experience, it's not like I'm not feeling good about myself. It's not like I'm not, but it's like, in hindsight, you look back and you go, man, I must have had a low view of myself to accept such treatment. Oh man, you've really like, I'm glad you shared that. I want to share something. You inspired me. You and Kat inspired me a lot, because you guys moved to your new place, and then you invited me over, and I think it's beautiful. It's awesome. It's so much of what you guys had talked about what you wanted. And it's just such a great space. And you guys made it home. And when I came over, you guys made me feel like I was at home. And I helped you move out of your old place, which I liked. But now that I see you in your new place, and it's not like, oh, we deserve better, bigger, blah, blah. It wasn't even like that. It was just like, we have what we want, and we could have that. You know, that was at least the way it was communicated to me. And it was interesting when we were moving, like, I have such a positive experience of your new place. I had a positive experience of your old place, but when we were moving and you were moving out the furniture and stuff, and I remember I saw there was this hole in the wall in one of your rooms. And it was like a part of the place was falling apart. And it was like, it kind of let me see inside the things that, as an outsider, you don't see in someone's life, this thing that you guys were accepting. And like, in hindsight, I look at that, I'm like, yeah, well, that was so below you guys to like exist in that. You know what I mean? And you guys had that recognition. And I remember it being a very scary change, but you guys did it and you made the move and you figured it out. And I feel like, we had conversations about it, and I knew on the turn it would be good, but now getting to see the whole thing play out, it's exactly this conversation. It's where you're living in what seems pretty good, but you had this vision for more, and it was scary to even dare ask for it, but you did. And then you actually took actions to change. And it's like, it seems like such a little thing, but it was pretty big. I mean, you guys actually moved your shit with a ferry. You did some things that a lot of people would be barriers for them.
There were some logistical challenges for sure.
Sure. But I feel like that's a lot, like there's a lot of reasons not to make your change. Right. And anyway, I just want to say that it inspired me. And it's like sometimes I think we have a way of justifying what we're accepting. And kind of when you guys moved to your new place, I feel like I got to see what you were accepting, but you were not going to accept anymore. And that to me was very inspiring, because I feel like there's a lot of things like that we can all benefit from, where it's like, we're accepting it. And it's very empowering to not accept these things that we shouldn't be accepting. We don't want to be accepting. And I think that's that's what's hidden behind comfort a lot of the time. These ugly little things that are like, yeah, no, that's not okay. I'm worth more than this,
Yeah. In some ways it's like, it's kind of an apt visual for some of this, or it's like you're sitting in, in your home, and you're like, well, I'm comfortable here. And absolutely you are comfortable here, but it's that part of the roof is leaking, and there's that draft that comes through there, and there's that big crack in the wall in the bedroom, and there's all of these, there are things that are falling apart, and you're just sort of living with them. Now, like, I want to be careful about this not being some sort of a judgment passing on things, or some idyllic view of perfection, or setting up some sort of thing. Cause like that's a risk too, of saying like, to perpetuate the sort of the myth of one day just arriving to a point where things are just perfect, because that's a delusion as well, but there's something, I don't know. I just want to mention that there's a difference in that and what we're talking about, in saying like, there are certain things where we just realize that we're better than we thought we were, that we're more capable than we thought we were, that more things are possible than we thought
possible. Yeah.
Than we thought possible. And that, what, maybe we deserve a little bit of that. Maybe we deserve a little bit more of what's possible, as opposed to what we're just sort of comfortable with. And I think that's the trap of comfortable, is that it's precisely that. It's comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
It's comfortable. And it's easy to just stay there.
Yeah. It's uncomfortable sometimes to do the thing that will, fix it or remedy it. Like, I think in your case, it wasn't about the place that you were moving from as much as it was about the environment that you wanted to move to. And that's why it was such a drastic change in location and stuff like that. Right. It's like, I think that's a part of it, but I don't think the answer is always, I need new, I need better. I need the new thing, and become this materialism thing. But I think it's something like, it's like, having crack in your wall and it's like not patching that up. Sometimes you got to just patch that up, or it's like a button that's loose on your shirt or something like that, and you don't tighten it, or you don't get it fixed, or you don't fix it. It's like these things, they're kind of like there where comfort exists. They often exist in these things that we just kind of don't do anything about it. And it's kind of like, sometimes I think a lot of change and a lot of great things can come out of doing very, very small things. Like, for example, we talked about this before, but you start making your bed, you clean and you tidy your place, and you throw out some shit that you don't use. That could change your life like dramatically. And I mean, I know it did for me. And it's like, sometimes I kind of go back to the scale thing. I think change and letting go of comfort doesn't have to be done like all or none. It can be done in little bits. Sometimes it needs to be dramatic. And I think that you'll know when that's the case. But I think most of the time it needs to be done in little ways, about little things. And it's about cleaning up, it's like cleaning up the corners, right? It's like a lot of the time it's just tuning some things up. And I mean, let me kind of pair this back to where we actually started the conversation. When we were talking about this before we ever recorded, I was talking a bit about territory. And something that I personally kind of believe is that there's territory for each of us that we don't know we could have. We don't know we could enter. We don't know we could be in. And until you're in it, you're not going to know what's possible. And there's the territory that you're in, and you only believe what's possible because you think that the territory you're in is the territory. And it's like, there's so much more for you. And I feel like sometimes doing these little changes gives you new territory, and that's why you see new possibility. And also, the other side of that is if you try to hang on to the territory you have, I feel like you continually lose it. It's just, you get less and less and less of the territory you think you have over time when you're comfortable. And pretty soon you end up with very little territory at all and very little possibility. So it kind of works both ways. It's not like, oh, I got this territory and I have it forever. No, it's like, it's always kind of deteriorating. That's why by accepting change, it's always growing. So by not accepting change, it's always deteriorating.
Yeah,
it's one or the other.
And how do you give yourself the capacity to accept that?
Yes.
One of the examples that we were given, and I would recommend to anybody, go and check out Simon Sinek on The Infinite Game. You can watch some free lectures that he talks a bit about it, but he also has a book on it, and it has a lot to do with what you're kind of mentioning. But one of the companies that we were talking about before we started recording we were talking about Sears. Like Sears was a company that at one point in time, like it was one of the biggest companies in North America. Like they were kings of the hill, so to speak. And now they're nothing, because they had their territory. They created something originally, right? They created something that wasn't possible before, and they made it possible, right? And it was a success. And then they just tried to hang on to their spot where they were and just keep things as they were. And now what are they? I don't even know if they exist anymore. Are there any stores, Sears stores left anywhere? I have no idea. But it's, this is kind of just what we're sort of talking about, is that, yeah, like there's finding the new territory, but then there's like not getting too attached to it. It's like you keep moving, you keep creating, you keep on finding out what's possible and finding, new lands to explore, so to speak, right? And it requires a certain element of giving up some of what's comfortable. Again, it doesn't have to be everything, but giving up a little bit of what's comfortable and not trying to control things so much, because if if you're not trying to control everything, that's when you actually get a window into something new, into a possibility, not a certainty, but a possibility, and if you continue to work that way, you continue to find new ways to adapt, new directions to go, new exciting things to explore. And there are plenty of examples of companies and people and whatever who have done that. They were this thing, but then they went and they branched out and they tried this thing and they did that thing, and they've continued to grow and to excite and to thrill and to captivate people of all types. So I think that it's, in many ways, it's about embracing, but maybe not, because it takes time. It takes work and experience to kind of really let yourself live that way. To live in a way where you've given up some control but really it's like it starts with allowing a little bit of space for that unknown element, uncontrollable element to come into your life in some form, and how much you can allow that. It might be just as much as, something, in many ways, this is kind of what we talked about last week, but like when something unexpected comes into your life, being like, oh, I wonder what this is all about. Or I wonder what's in here. Or like last week, we were talking about saying thank you to something kind of basically unknown coming in, something that you didn't plan on, or something that you didn't control coming into your life. And I think it's important to begin to find a practice in that. And I don't necessarily know exactly what that looks like, but I think that's one of the wonderful things about some of the different art forms that are out there. Like my wife, she got into pottery a couple of years ago, and I've watched sort of like reality shows and like pottery competitions, and right now I'm watching one on glass blowing. I'm watching this competition of glass blowers. It's fascinating, but one of the things that's so cool about those two art forms in particular is that you have very skilled people who have been doing these arts for decades, people who you would consider masters at what they do. And there are potters, like you ask any potter who's been doing it, they throw that piece into the kiln to be heated and they don't know what's going to come out. They have no idea what's going to come out, and they're constantly surprised by things that happen. And they learn to have room for that, because you have to. Because no matter how much you try to make it come out in a certain way, and of course, yeah, they learn how to do really cool things and how to direct their pieces in a certain way, but they're always delighted by how things come out, because they never know exactly how it's going to come out. And sometimes it's like, that's not how I planned it, but I love that. I love how that thing worked out. So I think that like that's such a beautiful way of learning to let that into your life a little way. And I think that we could all, find ways, learn ways to do that for ourselves in our lives. How can you allow a little bit of that uncontrolled element into your life and not only just kind of allow it and tolerate it, but kind of be delighted in it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's my challenge. It's my challenge to everybody out there, including myself, maybe.
Yeah. Something I've been thinking as you were talking was about, where like love exists in that unknown, uncontrolled, sometimes uncomfortable place, and I think it's kind of like, you got to follow the love. You got to follow that possibility. It's just like, life's so boring when you're in control of everything. If you're in control of everything and you're comfortable, it's like totally comfortable. I mean, you're alone. and that's if you're at peace with yourself. I mean, because if you're not at peace with yourself, I don't know how comfortable and happy you are. And you're just using people as a distraction. But, to have really genuine, honest, full relationships, you need to bring people into your life, and you need to have trust, and you need to have vulnerability. And that takes giving up control, and it takes, it takes willing to embrace change. I mean, you won't have a friend for long if you will not accept them evolving and changing. I mean, I think sometimes people have, this wasn't me, but I forget which philosopher. Is it Plato? I don't know. I forget who said this, honestly. I think it was Plato. I don't know. But they talked about friendships and how there's 3 types of friendships, and there's friendships of convenience, which is basically just they're in your neighborhood, they're in your environment, and so you're friends with them. And you probably wouldn't be friends with them really if they weren't convenient, and you wouldn't really make the effort much beyond that. And there's friends of service, and friends of service are people like your hairdresser or someone who does something for you. Sometimes it's not a literal job, but they just give you something, or they have some benefit for you, and so you get a service out of them, and really that's why you're friends. And if they no longer gave you that benefit, you probably wouldn't really be friends. And that's why a lot of people drift apart from that. And then the third friendship, which is the most rare, and, quite honestly, maybe a lot of people don't even have this real friendship, but it's the friendship of virtue, where you're actually friends because you share a common sense of virtue within each other, and you actually want to see them grow and change and become. And virtue requires that the person you become friends with may not be the person you end up friends with. And that's embraced. And, if you are trying to control things and you want things to be the same all the time, and you could be in a relationship like that. You could be in a marriage of service or convenience. And I think that's somewhat sad. And I think that people don't want to be in that. But I don't think it's too late. I think you can develop. And I know I did. A lot of my friends when I was younger, I'll openly admit, were friendships of convenience and service. And the ones I thought were a virtue for me were not a virtue back. And I didn't know how to make a real solid friend. And I didn't know who my real solid friends were until I hit my 30s. And then I started to find out pretty quick when shit hit the fan. But there's nothing more valuable in the world than a friend of virtue. There's just nothing more valuable than that. I mean, it's rare and special. And to be a friend of virtue and to have a mutual friend of virtue is just such a special thing. And I think the one requirement of a friend of virtue is that you're willing to abandon discomfort at times, and you're willing to accept change. And if you are, the world is open. Your oyster, the world's your oyster. It's anything, but it requires a certain amount of being able to pivot yourself, let people pivot, let things move. You can't control people. If you control people, you kill the friendship. The friendship can't get too comfortable, because if it's too comfortable, then you're not going to do the things you need to do to actually make the friendship stay together. So it's just one expression of many, but why this conversation, I think we're talking about it, it's just a reflection of that. I don't know what I'm kind of getting at, other than just to say, like, use that as an example to maybe take this further. So
yeah,
I was thinking about that.
Well, it's actually, you've opened the door to and something I had commented on that I wanted to make sure we talked about to some level, which is that, you are a force of change. We are all, each as individuals, forces of change. We don't always see ourselves that way. We might at times experience ourselves in that way, where we see, the fruits of our efforts or something come to be in some way, and we can recognize, oh wow, I did that. I created some change. But I think it's something that I know that I overlook at times, because like to see yourself as being change. We look at change as something kind of external to us, but it's like, you are change. You are change in action that's going on right now. You know, it's like, have you ever had somebody fall in love with you? Have you ever fallen in love with somebody else? No matter how, it's like, that is like a force of change that is happening that there's not much control over, but it's change that's in a human being, you know. And how can you deny the reality of that person as change? You know, in fact, I think that so often people are the greatest, you know, sort of examples of change that we can actually look to, you know, not from the micro to the macro. You know, like, people have created great change in the world, and we create great change in the worlds that we occupy. You know, like, it's, you know, whether it's your workplace, your home, your family, your friends, you know, the people in your community, whatever it is. You know, it's like, you often say, Brandon, like that, like, you know, your presence matters. You know, like, your presence makes a difference. People notice, people are watching, you know, not in like a weird way, people are watching, but just like, people, like, we take each other in. We notice a lot about the people around. It's like people that we don't even know, but we take people in, and it has an effect. That's change, you know, and in subtle and not so subtle ways, like, we are incredible forces of change. So I just thought, you know, hey, everyone, let's take a second to think about just how much you are actually a force of change.
Can I say one other thing about that?
Of course.
Thank you. I would say that just because you don't actually recognize, or you're able to see or experience the change that you're making, doesn't mean that it isn't happening. You know, a lot of the time you're making an impact and you don't even realize you're making an impact. And I think that part of getting older and becoming wiser and more experienced and pushing yourself to do more, you begin to actually develop the ability to see that stuff, feel that stuff, notice that stuff. But, you know, especially for our younger audience, you know, you might think, well, I don't really matter. I don't really make a difference. And maybe, you know, maybe someone older is getting this as well. But it's something that I had to learn. I didn't have to learn, but I learned along the way. It was like, just recognizing that you matter. It's just such a, I wish this wasn't a lesson that we had to learn. I wish it was something that we were just kind of like, we had mentors and teachers and guides that really like made us know that early. But I feel like people have to realize, you know, that they matter. And I think for a lot of young people, you know, I think they don't realize how much they matter. You know, and maybe you're older and maybe that lands with you too. And I think that's fine. But I just think there's a lot of young people, there's a lot of teenagers out there, and they just don't realize that they matter. And it's like, you matter so much more than you know, and there's older people who don't even realize how much they matter. But you know what? When someone dies, you start to find out pretty quick. And hopefully they don't have to for you to realize they matter. And I think that the thing is like, you matter. And part of your job in this life is to realize that. And by realizing that, you're not going to want to just be so small and so comfortable and so controlled. You're going to see that like this wild, spontaneous spirit that's inside of you, like it needs to come out, and it has important things to do. What that is, I don't know, but like, it just kind of, I felt inclined to say that, Evan. I felt it was important because it was
important, Brandon. I'm glad that you brought it in.
It was a big lesson for me. It was one of those lessons that you know, I only wish I learned earlier. You know, because it shit, you know, like I didn't even realize like I might have hurt somebody's feelings because I didn't realize I mattered, you know, and it's like stuff like that, you know. But when you realize you matter, you just have so much more care, so much more possibility to do more with who you are and what you are. But anyway, you know, after that deep talk. How's your beer?
It's good, man. It's good.
Yeah.
I'm drinking Steel and Oak. Steel and
No
Oak.
shit. I'm drinking Steel and Oak too.
Well, how about that? That was not even planned. This is Radiant Things.
Oh, I like that one. I've had it before.
Yeah, hibiscus grapefruit pale ale.
Yeah.
That
You like it?
Oh yeah. Absolutely. It's it's still a beer, but like it's got like those little sort of flavors to it, like a little bit of tartness, but very drinkable. I'm enjoying it immensely.
Nice. Well, I'm having Steel and Oak as well, and I'm having their Red Pilsner, which I don't know if you've had. I don't think I've ever had on the show, but it's delicious. It's really good beer, really solid. I'm really happy with it. I don't know what to say about it, honestly. I don't want to get into a big description, so I'm just gonna say I recommend it. 2 thumbs up. It's real good. You should try it. It's smooth. It's good. It's tasty. It's very flavorful at the same time. So I don't know. It's probably very generic, but it's good.
They used to have a beer that
Yeah.
I haven't had in such a long time. I don't know if they still do it. It was usually around fall, and it's called like a Rogenweizen. So it was like not a Hefeweizen. It was it was like a rye wheat or something like that instead of. Yeah, and it was like a darker colored sort of like kind of a wheat ale, but like a rye wheat ale, and it was so good. It was so good. I miss it. I miss it because I used to live close to them, so it was one that I knew well. Maybe one of these days.
Well, they're a good little brewery. I went with one of our mutual friends. I feel like it must have been a couple months back, but we went and we sat at Steel and Oak, and we had a couple beers, and they're so nice there and so friendly, and even with everything going on, they're being really responsible about how they manage the place, and it's nice. I feel like sometimes, it's one of the big things about craft breweries. Like we always appreciated them for the social element, and it's one of the biggest things I miss during these times. But I feel like we're trying in this world. We're trying, and you can't keep people apart forever. We're going to find ways to connect. We're going to find ways to be together. We're social beings, and whatever the hell we're going through right now, this is temporary. And change will come, and this is when this is a moment of change where we're like, yeah, well, I'd like it to come sooner, but hey, you know what, sometimes you got to sit in things and they can't change as quickly as you like. That's something we never really talked about, but I'll throw that into the pot because why not? Okay, let me wrap this up and say my final piece, and then you can close. I'm just going to say this, Evan. Your comment on not feeling worthy enough for the change that we want landed with me. And, it's kind of, I would say, yeah, that's kind of how I thought of it, but I'd never heard it articulated that way. And it really hit home for me. It was just such a good way to look at it, because I think, I think that, I don't know, maybe I don't want to say this, but for everybody, but I know for myself, I spent so much of my life just not feeling good enough. And it was hard, it actually makes me a little bit emotional to think about it. And, that's because I didn't always get encouraged, and I didn't always have really good mentors around me. And it took me a long time to realize that I mattered, and that I was worthy, and that I could do things, and, and that my life meant something. And I just want to say, people out there, like, you matter, like you really are worthy of these things, and you don't have to put yourself, second fiddle to your dreams. And I think that it's, change is necessary, but maybe when you start seeing yourself in the picture, maybe you'll make those moves. Maybe you'll make those little incremental changes that are so necessary. And I think that what I'm going to walk away with today is that's that's a winner for me. That's like I'm gonna literally reevaluate a lot of things in my life. I'm gonna use that filter, and I'm gonna make some big assessments. So thanks for that. I appreciate it.
You never know. So often I find that when I'm talking to people and the thing that I'm, the piece of advice that I think I'm giving isn't the one that they take. It's usually something, right. It's like, oh, but it's like, we had that talk and you said this thing. I was like, oh yeah, I was trying to actually say something else, but that's amazing. I'm glad that hit something. It's funny like that. Yeah, I mean, I think that I'll just reiterate on something I said just towards the end again. While I was saying, it's like, this is probably something I should have saved for the end, but here we are. I think it's just like leave room for the uncontrolled, chaotic element to enter in. That's because that's where the creativity is. You got to leave room for it. Got to give it a space. And I think that's where we do exercise the best element of control, is because that chaos, that uncontrolled thing is like saying, give me a place to play. I want a place to play, because otherwise it's, breaking your glasses and scratching up your furniture and all this shit. It's just like, give it a place to play. Give it something to play with, give that uncontrolled thing a somewhere to go. We need to leave that room in our lives, and that's where we find the possibilities. That's where we find even hope for things, and where we can find direction and ways forward, and beautiful surprises that just give our lives so much color and richness.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you got something out of this, if you feel it improved your life or your journey in any way, please take a moment to subscribe, leave a review, or share the episode.
You can also support us on Patreon, where we have tons of great bonuses. You are the ones that make the show possible and help us to thrive. Thank you for joining us.